this video, I would like to talk about melody and trying to do more of a kind of idea of telling a story within your solo. All of the techniques that I've looked at over the past 8 videos are very much should be a kind of scaffolding from which to actually then create a melodic solo. So the idea of these sort of ideas of, you know, the constant scale or the riffs and licks or repetition or sequencing or modal interchange really don't mean very much if they're just employed in a kind of scattershot way where you put one in at one point and then you suddenly play a really fast line off, you know, and then you suddenly go to another thing. The idea really is like any great story or piece of poetry or film or something, there needs to be some sense of narrative. Now, this isn't always obvious, so let me give you just a few examples of people that do create very strong narratives in terms of jazz. Billie Holiday. I mean, if you're going to listen to, I think, and develop your understanding of melodic sort of improvisation, I think that listening to singers is one of the kind of keys here. My favourite is definitely Billie Holiday, but, you know, Ella Fitzgerald or Sarah Vaughan or I don't know, Diana Krall or any sort of jazz singers are really, really useful to listen to, because also you're getting an idea often of the lyrics of the song, and the lyrics often allow you, I think, to think about what the sort of overall feel of the solo is supposed to be about. But also people like Jim Hall, for example, on guitar. He's not a fast player or a flashy player, but he often develops very, very strong melodic themes. Similarly, Thelonious Monk, I think, is an excellent melodic player and often comes back to the melody over and over again and uses that as the basis of his solos. I think, you know, if you contrast, for example, Jim Hall to Pat Martino is very, very different in the sort of agenda that he has within his solos, and, you know, he's equally excellent in a kind of like different way. But I feel like someone like Jim Hall, there's very, very kind of well thought out kind of melodic sort of development. So this is what I wanted to talk about. So first of all, the most obvious way of understanding how to develop melodic themes within your solo is to use the melody itself. And I think this is a perfectly valid way of improvising. So what we can do is to take the melody and now play around with it. So once you've learnt the melody kind of in the way it's sort of originally written, which is quite difficult to get to because trying to find the original record of some things is quite tricky. But basically, if you can play the melody reasonably straight, then it's useful to start now playing around with the... So that idea there is, you know, just taking it. I added a few sort of embellishments and various things like that. One of the ways you can learn to do this, I think, which is really, really useful, is to take a tune like Autumn Leaves or Stella or All the Things You Are or All of Me, any one of those kind of old, you know, sort of like really good basic standards, and listen to a number of examples by different jazz musicians. And listen to what they actually do, and possibly, I mean, one of the best ways, obviously, to me, the absolute, you know, archetypal way of learning jazz is to transcribe the thing, learn it by ear, be able to actually sing along to the solo itself, possibly write the whole thing out if it's useful to kind of take it apart, but particularly being able to actually sing along with the solo. This is Lenny Tristano's approach to teaching his kind of like students, was to be able to sing along directly with the record. The way to do this, again, is to slow the record down itself and then sing along with it, and eventually you should be able to sing it without the record at all. But singing along with it is a really useful thing to do because it also shows you all the kind of prosodic elements, the way they phrase, the inflections, the dynamics, all of these kind of things, real subtleties that make the music kind of swing and sing. So, first of all, embellishing and shifting melodies is a really good way of developing your melodic playing. And I think there's a sort of like a bit that comes before that, which is that sort of natural ability to be able to hear something simple and then put it onto your instrument. One of the ways you can do that is to just get used to playing very, very simple tunes directly from your head in any sort of key. So for example, Happy Birthday. So something like Happy Birthday, so I didn't quite hit that note. But Happy Birthday is really good because it's teaching you a sort of intervallic sort of idea. It goes up to an octave, it does all sorts of things. If I did Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in a different key. You should be able to do these, like take a really basic melody and see whether you can play them. And you might find that, you're really good at this and you can sort of like pick out any kind of, it doesn't have to be jazz at all, it could be any sort of song that's very, very basic, and see whether you can do this. If you're not so good at this, then it's something actually I would really recommend spending some time doing. Make a list of very basic tunes and see whether you can play them in sort of like just name a key, try to play it. It's really getting you used to, again, that kind of musical mind into instrument. So this is a very good idea because then when you're actually playing around with the kind of melody, it's much easier because you're already used to hearing what you're trying to hear and then putting it onto the instrument, which I think is really a very important sort of part of learning how to play good melodic solos. So there's a few other kind of ideas. One is kind of motivic development, and this is something I think that you can learn a lot from Jim Hall, I think, when you listen to him playing in particularly trio and duo settings. He plays a very good album with Ron Carter and another one with Charlie Hayden, and you can hear him building themes for quite a long time. So if I took a sort of theme, something really basic, but again this is good because it's a practice basically, so a little three-note motif. Don't have to do it all the way through, but basically see where it kind of takes you, this little melodic theme. Jim Hall often builds them up out of kind of two-note motifs. Oh my God. So that idea again is to sort of take something, a little cell, and basically develop it kind of through the entire piece. So we thought about taking the melody itself and sort of shifting the melody and making use of that as an improvisational basis. We can also think about kind of like the idea of motivic development as well, just taking small motifs and actually employing them all the way through. This corresponds with something that Pat Metheny said, which I think is really important, which is that when you listen to really good soloists, they always take the idea that they are playing, and the idea is this kind of key thing for Metheny, and play it right through to its logical conclusion. And when you listen to people that are kind of like just getting going on jazz, or sort of, I suppose, sort of, not amateur level, but people that haven't quite got it together, you'll often hear sort of like them coming up with one idea, but just as it sounds like it's getting going, it will go on to a different idea because they don't perhaps have the skill either to keep it going, or they haven't heard that it was a really good idea, so they just shift to the next thing. And again, you sort of hear them sort of go for something, you're thinking, wow, that's good, and then just as it's beginning to develop, it goes to another idea. So the idea here is, and it takes quite a while to get to this and actually be disciplined enough to do it, is as you're hearing these ideas unfold, to stay with them as much as you possibly can. And if they go into a kind of odd place, then kind of that's where the magic can often happen, these kind of happy accidents. Another idea is the concept of really things like dynamics, I think, and prosody or prosody, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And this was something that Evelyn Glennie, I think, has done demonstrations on, who's the percussionist, who has often done examples where she's read the music exactly as it's written, but with absolutely no expression at all. And then the second time she does it is to kind of like throw herself completely into it, kind of physically. the difference is absolutely massive. So things like dynamics and kind of like attack and inflection are a huge part of making a solo actually kind of connect. Piano is not, you know, is not so easy in a way, but you know. I wouldn't do that in a solo because that doesn't really sort of make sense. But there's so much in terms of what you could do dynamically to actually make the piece interesting. And again, this is all part of the way that we tend to talk as well and communicate. So when you think about how someone sort of talks, you know, we don't talk in a kind of monotone level. As we get kind of passionate, we will sort of, you know, our voices will kind of like increase, or as we're trying to make a point, it may sort of come down. And the final thing, and I'm not so good at this when I'm talking, is the use of space. There was a very good exercise that the Simon Purcell, who's an absolutely excellent jazz musician and educator, he came down and did a workshop with us. And it was an idea of basically, if I take Autumn Leaves again, is to leave space first of all straight away. So instead of coming straight in with a phrase, to actually leave a bit of space initially. So that's a really nice idea, but he took it a step further, which has always stayed with me, which is then to try the same exercise, but at the point when you feel like you want to play something, to hold back even further. So something along like this. So there, I kind of want to come in at that point, but sort of just leave it. And that sets up a really interesting rhythm, because if I just start playing straight away, all that kind of stuff, there's no actual natural rhythm the way that you would kind of talk, because you know, so I think it's a really important thing to sort of develop your understanding of space and listen to people that use space really well. I've got two examples of some solos that are quite obscure, but they're basically because my main instrument is the bass, not the piano. And on the bass, I tend to play very, very spaciously when I have solos. And one of them is Charlie Hayden. He does a superb solo over in the album Under Missouri Sky, and I think it's called My Spanish Love Song. And if you listen to the thematic development, he gets one very, very short solo. He does this kind of thing where it goes... And he just develops this kind of theme that's incredibly simple. But after Pat Metheny's done quite a lot of kind of like stuff, and you know, he does a lovely solo as well, but it's quite notey. This lovely sort of like slow solo, it's extremely logical. And again, that's one that's always sort of stayed with me. The other one is Steve Swallow, who's my favourite bass player. And actually, it was the first solo I ever heard him play. And he played this solo on an album called Quiet by John Scofield, on a track called After the Fact. I think it's the first one that's on there. And again, Scofield is playing a lot of kind of notes in his solo. And then suddenly, I hadn't actually heard Steve Swallow, so I didn't know anything about him. In fact, I didn't even realise there was an electric bassist on it at that particular point. But he suddenly played this solo, which just went like... And there's like... And there's like lovely pauses. It was incredibly, again, logical, complete contrast to what Scofield's doing. And it's always been an example to me of the idea of, you know, the difference between very sort of melodic playing and and much more kind of notey playing. And there's nothing wrong. I love that. Part of what I love about jazz is, you know, the fast, you know, frantic stuff, and I love Coltrane and stuff like that. But I really admire those players that also play very spaciously. Paul Desmond is another good example as well. People very sort of like who create themes that you can kind of go along with. Just to finish off, a final point, Amy Nolte's has done an excellent couple of videos on melody. I think one of them is called Do You Melody Bruh or something like that. But one of them she shows you like if you play a phrase, if I do that, can you sort of like hear what the next phrase would be? And generally speaking, and if you watch her video, she does it very well and has actually planned it. You know, do boo ba 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 ba. There's a really, you know, humans have got this very musical, logical mind, and when you set up a phrase that's actually well constructed over a particular sequence, you'll find that there's usually a fairly logical sort of conclusion to your phrase that you can use. And if you actually start listening internally to what your kind of ear is telling you to do, you often come up with the best solos. And it doesn't need to be about lots of riffs and flash. It can be very, very sort of direct, very strong sort of melodic ideas. So I will leave you with that. I would highly recommend, if you look at Amy Nolte's melody videos, I found them really interesting. And, you know, listen to people like Jim Hall, Billie Holiday, Thelonious Monk, and Charlie Hayden. Thank you, that's it.